This afternoon with Adam Shirley. Make sure you're listening in after 3 o'clock this afternoon. So the NBN, or Telstra in fact, to be more precise, has reissued its maps of what's happening with the NBN, where it's going, where it's not going, etc. And a quick perusal of the maps would show that there's been a big change in the plan for Canberra. Now, we had put a request in this morning. We had hoped that the Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, would join us to talk to us about the plan and why these areas would no longer be part of the NBN rollout. Unfortunately, we were told that he would not be available. We also put a request in for Zed Seselja. We were told he also wouldn't be available, but ACT Senator Kate Lundy is available. ACT Labor Senator Kate Lundy. Kate Lundy, good morning to you. Thanks for coming in.
Good morning, Ross.
So, technically, Malcolm Turnbull always said that they would honour all the contracts where construction had started. Now, a lot of these areas that are no longer on the map, construction hadn't started there, had they?
What we have was a program for commencement of construction. So that was on the forward year plan. When NBN Co released their 3-year forward plan, I think there was a reasonable assumption made that the contracts were in place because these were scheduled builds and the residents of the affected suburbs were certainly very excited about it.
But construction hadn't started, so technically Malcolm Turnbull has been true to his word, hasn't he?
Well, I don't know. And one of the problems here, Ross, is we're not getting enough information. And unfortunately, as a result of this announcement yesterday, it seems that the government is going to prevent accurate information about the build being available. And there's going to be a change in way the information's presented. It'll be no longer on a website where people can go and check the status of the build in their area, managed by the companies themselves doing the build. Now there'll be a weekly statement by the government, which won't include specifics of location. So they're hiding information about the build, denying the public from the facts and figures about where the build's going to be. So I think it's another example of hiding the truth and the facts about the national broadband network. And I think that's not only a shame, but of course it's a political problem, I think, for the government, cutting back on the NBN anyway. And this is just a really pathetic attempt to try and prevent the information from being part of the public conversation.
So which suburbs are going to be affected?
Well, based on the maps, the suburbs that are going to be directly affected are Belconnen, Bruce, Cook and Macquarie and Aranda, and in North Canberra, Dixon, O'Connor, Turner, Braddon, Reid, Campbell, Ainslie, City and Acton. So
these were all suburbs that under the old maps, so 12 months or so ago, they were on the rollout plan sometime in the next 3 years.
That's right.
Going to be, and the new maps, which were just released yesterday, there's no reference to these areas.
No, they've been taken off the map. And we know through local NBN...
Which, by the way, which doesn't necessarily mean they won't be connected eventually, does it?
Well, the problem is, Ross, we just don't know. There's so little information coming out. We can make an assumption if they're off the 3-year projection list, these suburbs are not going to get the NBN, and that's the assumption I've made in making my media statement yesterday. I am demanding answers from the government about what does this mean for these residents, because we've got people out there who are counting on it, who are making decisions about perhaps their micro business from home, about other things, about the availability of a high bandwidth network. And Ross, you'd know, because I talked about this a lot during the last year in the election campaign, we've had the highest take-up rates for the national broadband network, not just in the country, but on all assessments so far, the fastest take-up in the world for people signing on to a new high bandwidth network.
That's out in Gungahlin especially, and one of the reasons being that they had next to nothing out there anyway, so they've gone for nothing to all of a sudden getting access to something which is useful for them.
Well, useful's putting it mildly. I think they've been hungry for bandwidth for as long as I've been in politics, and that's a pretty long time now.
But Kate Lundy, do you think the suburbs that you've just listed off that all of a sudden find themselves not on the waiting list anymore, not on the list anymore, do you think they would be surprised? Because the opposition made no secret. The then opposition made no secret of the fact that they didn't like the NBN arrangements as they stood. They thought that it wasn't the most economically wise viable way forward. So should we all sit there and go shock horror? They're not actually going to be going through and following through on some of the promises that the Labor government made for a product that the Liberal Party thought was a waste of time.
Ross, there are two issues in that. The first one is the impression the coalition government gave, the coalition gave in the election campaign, and that was that existing contracts would stand. And they were very careful to say that because they were under pressure as to what potentially the cost to government would be if they started cancelling contracts and what the disruption would be to both NBN Co and Telstra and the other construction companies who were engaged in work under contract. All the impressions that they gave was where there was construction scheduled, that would go ahead. It now appears that that is not the case, and that's why I'm asking these questions. They need to answer them. We need to know what is happening with those contracts and why all of those suburbs, tens of thousands of people will now be, it seems, denied their national broadband network connection despite it being under contract to be built. There was another point I wanted to make, and that is the more general one around broadband and the NBN. We know that through the course of the last term and previously that the coalition were all about being, an oppositionist entity. They were focused on good policy. They opposed the NBN because it was a convenient thing for them to do. I think everybody
they would argue that they opposed it because economically it wasn't sound policy.
Yeah, but
that's the argument they put forward.
I think they can see that the fact that the take-up rates have been strong, that it is a great policy, and I still think there's scope for them to reconsider, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen.
Mogwai asks via Twitter, is Mawson around to Canberra still going ahead with the July 13 start? What about Nichols, May 13?
Well, only the suburbs that I've listed were the ones that had disappeared from the website and the forward plan. So I think for those suburbs, if you're on the plan, you can make the assumption it's going ahead until we hear otherwise. If you, like me, can't get information from them, I suggest perhaps a direct approach to Mr Turnbull's office is the only way, saying he's going to be filtering what information is released into the public domain from now on.
Well, Chris actually says, why not, Kate Lundy? You ask government before you release a media statement. Kate does not know if those suburbs are off the 3-year plan or the plan altogether. Why not find out before slinging mud publicly?
Well, the issue is that the government won't say. There is no information, and what we know about this government is if they don't like saying something, they just take the information away and take the facts away.
And by the way, we did put a request in, I'll just repeat, we did put a request in to Malcolm Turnbull and Zedza Selja this morning, asking them to come on and explain to those communities that are no longer on the map what it all means and where they now stand, but unfortunately they weren't available.
Well, I don't know their reasons for not being available, Ross, but I think it just reinforces my point. The government doesn't want to talk about this. They don't have answers. They know that people are going to be upset about it, so they run and hide.
Mary from Braidwood says, I'd tweet a reply about the NBN, but my wireless internet is dead again. Another text says, I don't have the map in front of me, but from memory, all those suburbs voted left on percentage. Is Tuggeranong losing their NBN rollout? Well, I don't know that Tuggeranong's actually on the map, is it? Is Tuggeranong as part of the... I don't think Tuggeranong's on the...
No, I think Tuggeranong was scheduled for further down the track. You could sort of see they're working from Gungahlin and out.
Yep. Greg of Queanbeyan, and Ruth actually says, Tuggeranong was not scheduled to get the NBN for years and years. Welcome to the club. Greg of Queanbeyan says some areas of Queanbeyan listed as construction commenced are now off the map. This includes areas that were scheduled to be available from January. Were they really still just in planning? Do you know what the arrangement was happening in Queanbeyan, Kate Lundy?
No, I don't know. But I think, again, it shows there are contracts that were clearly in place that now seem to be pulled up. And that's really the fundamental question the government must answer. Why are things that we understood to be either commenced or scheduled for commencement, i.e. contracts in place, now stopping or now being withdrawn? And what I'm challenging the government to do is tell us what is going on. For all intents and purposes, it looks like that work has stopped. If it hasn't stopped, come in here, sit next to me and explain what's going on.
Mogwai wants to know how they check out the new map. I think if you just go to the Telstra website.
Yeah, and I tweeted the link to the maps yesterday, so we'll see if people can follow my Twitter feed and track the map that way, but I'll post another one.
And Vicky from Burra says, how about concentrating on those areas like Burra who don't have any internet because Telstra won't maintain the exchange? So very few people have internet in the area. It makes it very hard for my 3 children to do their homework and for us to fulfil our council obligations, says Vicky from Burra. And Peter from G says, I would like the NBN, but I prefer to have a job.
One of the great, I think, visions behind the National Broadband Network, Ross, was that it wouldn't discriminate where you lived in Australia. So if you lived in Burra and your kids needed to do their homework, or you lived in the inner city and ran a micro business from your apartment, everyone would have been able to get it. Now we're going to end up with a system where there is a digital divide firmly entrenched. Where you live will depend on what bandwidth you get. And I think that's, you know, devastating for Australia, because we certainly saw this, Labor certainly saw this as a competitive edge in an increasingly challenging economy, both locally and internationally.
I would have liked to have asked the Liberal Party this question as well, but unfortunately they're not available. But do we know then if these areas are not getting the NBN, the Kevin Rudd NBN, will they, though, have access to the Malcolm Turnbull fibre to the node? Is that what they'll get instead, or are they still going to get the original?
Well, we actually don't know that either.
No.
And that's part of the problem. I mean, some of the newspaper commentary talks about in those areas fibre would be going to nodes, but we don't have. And I think it's probably too early to see any construction plans for fibre to the node. But remember, we're quite lucky here in Canberra. We have the old Transact network, which is a fibre to the node network. We know what fibre to the node feels like, and this is why the debate in the election campaign was, I think, so futile in many respects. Fibre to the node does not cut it. It doesn't provide people with their high bandwidth needs. It won't underpin the type of innovation with digital service delivery that we were anticipating and hoping for and planning for. It's just not going to be good enough. It will be a deficient service, I think, even though for some people, like the person in Burra that texted in, will be better than nothing. It's still not going to achieve the kind of vision we foresaw for Australia with the NBN.
Glenn says on Twitter that the 3-year plan will be announced after December's strategic review is complete. We do know that that's when Malcolm Turnbull wants the final.
Well, as I said, it's a bit unreasonable to think that they would have that rollout plan already. My concern is the existing contracts. Why do they appear not to be honoured, and suburbs coming off those maps?
And Leon from Goulburn says, will this drive up the price of the already installed NBN? A premium product has been created. Again, these are all...
Look, Ross, the digital divide is back. That's the devastating thing for me. As you know, this is an area of public policy I've worked hard on for a very long time, and getting rid of the digital divide to me was the greatest achievement of the National Broadband Network, where all Australians would be able to access a high bandwidth network.
Senator Kate Lundy, good to catch up with you. Thank you for coming in this morning.
An absolute pleasure, Ross.
And as I've said, we did put in requests to both Malcolm Turnbull and Zed Seselja, asking them to come in and to explain this morning exactly what all this means, and if you're in one of those suburbs that all of a sudden is not on the NBN map, what it would mean for you. But unfortunately, no one was available in those to talk to us about that. It's 12 to 9 on 666 Breakfast.